Hi everybody, Fred the Pirate here, and I'm here to do a review of Legend of Korra Season 3, Episodes 4 and 5. So I was actually kind of surprised that this week that we got a double episode because I was under the impression, based on the news I had of Season 3 of Legend of Korra, that this week we would only get season 4, since I know last week we didn't get any episodes because it was the 4th of July here in the States. So it was actually a pleasant surprise to get 2 episodes. So what happened in the 2 episodes is that in episode 4 there were 2 major things that happened. Zahir and his gang broke out their final member, who is named Pali, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So she is a firebender, and that she appears to be related in some fashion to Combustion Man from the first series, because she has the same eye pattern in the middle of her forehead that Combustion Man had. So I'm not sure how she's related to Combustion Man, but it's obvious that there's a relation. So potentially maybe there was like a whole tribe of combustion people in the Fire Nation, and because I mean we know, as far as we're aware, that Combustion Man, I believe, was killed in the last series. So I don't think that Pali is directly related to Combustion Man unless he somehow survived. But I'm pretty sure he died in Avatar The Last Airbender. So I think if she is related to Combustion Man, it's probably not directly, although she may not be genetically related to Combustion Man at all. So it's hard to say. But anyways, Zahir and his gang break her out of her prison, and that there's this really awesome fight between Tanrak, Eska Desna, and Fire Lord Zuko. Of course, they obviously lose the fight, but you know, everybody is alive. You know, all the good guys managed to live. And I mean, Zuko puts up a pretty good fight, considering that he's probably like in his 80s by this point. So, you know, he does a pretty good job holding his own against a group of 4 very powerful bending masters. I was kind of hoping that he'd be a little bit stronger, but you know, he is in his 80s, and obviously, you know, Zahir and his gang has to be successful at busting out Pali, or else, you know, we wouldn't have a conflict for the rest of the season. So pretty much that happens in the first part of episode 4, and then in the later part of episode 4, Korra and the gang bust out all the airbenders that the Earth Queen's keeping captive. And I was actually surprised that this plot point got resolved that quickly, because obviously they're successful at busting them out. They find Kai and they get him, and so that works all right. And like I said, again, like, I was really surprised that this plot point got resolved so quickly. Like, I figured that this was kind of something that would take a little longer. I mean, because we're still, you know, towards the beginning of the season, and typically, you know, the seasons have lasted about 12 episodes. So I figured that this would happen a little, that there'd at least be like 2 or 3 more episodes dedicated to this. So I was kind of surprised it got resolved this long. Obviously, the Earth Queen confronts Korra and the gang, and she says, you know, and she tells Korra that, you know, if you bust out these people, you know, they're my citizens, and I have a right to do whatever I want with them, and if you take them, that is an act of war. So that's definitely going to be very interesting for the rest of the season, because I'm not exactly sure how that's going to play out. So that makes me, like, again, like, so this episode 4 is very, you know, antagonist heavy, and it at least, you know, laying out what the issues are going to be. So far, the Earth Queen and Zahir seem to be on equal footing as far as antagonist goes, because I'm not exactly sure yet who's going to be the big bad, because obviously the Earth Queen starting a war is going to be a really big deal. So I'm still thinking she might be the bigger antagonist just because she presents a bigger global threat. And Zahir kind of seems like he's a lesser threat because he kind of just seems more of a personal threat to Korra, as episode 4 established. So, in episode 5, this was more Lin Bei Fong heavy episode. So Korra and the gang find out that there is an airbender in an all metal city. So they go and visit the city, and they find out that the city is run by Lin's sister. And so they get to meet Lin's sister, and we get to meet her husband and her children, and we get to see a lot of, and through that we get to see a lot about Lin and her sister's backstory and kind of how Toph was as a mom. So the airbender is that they find is Lin's niece Opal, and so assumingly, Opal is probably a non-bender, and she appears to be one of the only non-benders in her family, although I think I'm not sure about one of her brothers, but she has 4 brothers, and 3 of them are benders, and one of her brothers I'm not sure about, but he may very well be a bender, I'm not sure, but a lot of her family members seem to be benders, so she's obviously the only girl, so I imagine that's going to be really interesting. But really, like, the meat of episode 5 is learning about Lin and her sister and how they were raised. And so Lin has a very combative relationship with her sister, and this has something to do with the past. And so we're not sure exactly what went on, but they have a very combative relationship. And I think Lin takes this out fairly unfairly on Opal because, she's just not really happy with her sister. And so Korra talks to Lin's sister, and she kind of asks him, like, well, what's up with you and Lin? And she mentions that, they've always been, that this kind of goes back to how they were raised. And she mentions that, as we know, Toph had a very strict upbringing by her parents, and so when she became a mother, that she decided to raise her daughters with a much more laissez-faire attitude, and kind of just let them figure out who they were on their own. And Lin's sister mentions that this was kind of a double-edged sword, because in the end she and Lin did find out who they were. It's just that because of how busy their mother was, that they felt like they had to compete a lot for Toph's affection. And I think a lot of this had to do with, not only was Toph busy being the chief of police, but we find out that Toph was a single mother, and so that both Lin and her sister had 2 separate fathers, and that neither of them know who their father is. So obviously, being a single mom's hard, and obviously Toph was a busy career woman at the same time, and so I think Lin and her sister felt like they had to, like, it was hard to get their mom's attention, and I think ultimately Lin's sister feels that their relationship suffered for that. I actually kind of liked episode 5 more than episode 6 because we get to learn a lot about Toph, and we get to learn about Lin, and we get to learn about her sister, and about how all of them dealt with that. We also get to find out a little bit about what's going on with Toph. We find out that she's still alive, and that currently she is on a journey of enlightenment. So hopefully we will see or hear more about Toph in the future. We also learn a little bit about Sokka. So that was cool too. We learned that he was the chief of the Southern Water Tribe, I'm assuming before Tonraq was. So that was interesting to learn cool stuff about Sokka. But again, this was more of a Toph and Bei Fong family heavy episode. I definitely kind of enjoy what the series has done with parents and families throughout the series. I definitely enjoy the fact that in season 2 and now in season 3, and obviously in Avatar: The Last Airbender itself, although more in the comics than in the actual show, that the show's really explored the ideal of being a parent. And I like the fact that with season 2 and season 3, that they didn't make the characters, particularly Aang and Toph, that they didn't make them just these perfect ideal characters, and like not ideal but ideal parents. Like they gave them a lot of depth, and it was kind of interesting, obviously, last season learning that Aang wasn't a perfect dad, that he gave too much attention to Tenzin, and although it was reasonable why he gave more attention to Tenzin, because obviously Tenzin is an airbender and Aang is trying to do the best he can to save his culture, it seems like he may have spent a lot more time and a lot more attention with Tenzin than maybe what would have actually been reasonable given the situation. And obviously Kaya and Bumi suffered for that, and I think both of them are the way they are currently because of that, and it was cool that the show dealt with that. And I think similarly with this episode, I like the fact that the show didn't make Toph this ideal Uber mom, and I like the fact that as a character, she evidently had 2 failed relationships with 2 men that either didn't want to be involved with her and their respective children, or either Toph felt that they were not very good men and that they didn't need to be in her and her daughter's life. And so, like, I feel that I really like that because, in stories with women, I think a lot of times we see situations with, and I think Katara shows this really well, that obviously Katara settled down and she got married and she had children. And, and that is a very traditional role. Whereas, Toph didn't take that role. And that makes a lot of sense for who Toph was. That Toph was a very independent woman. And realistically, there are a lot of people who get in relationships and sometimes it doesn't work out. And I don't think that makes Toph a worse person. It's just that stuff happens. And I like the fact that the show went there because they could have made Toph get married and have this perfect marriage and be this perfect mom. But they were much more realistic about it, which I appreciate. And I like the fact that as a mom, she wasn't perfect. Like, it makes sense why Toph did what she did as a mom. I mean, we saw what her family life was like. We saw that Toph wasn't allowed to do what she wanted to do because her parents felt that because of her disability that they needed to coddle and control her, and that she felt trapped by that. And I think that she responded as a parent by giving her children more room than probably what was good. But I think similarly, I think obviously her heart was in the right place. I don't think Toph intended to be a bad mom, and I think that's important. And I think neither Lynn or her sister blame Toph for that because they understand that she was doing what she felt was best. And I think similarly, I think Toph's parents did what they did for Toph because they assumed that that was what was best for Toph. And I think that they didn't intentionally want to be bad parents, but that's what happened. And I think, like, I'm definitely glad that all around that the show deals with parenthood and family issues without it just whitewashing. And I think you can tell with Lynn and her sister's character that the way they were raised affected them. And I think you can definitely see this with both the girls, and I think it makes sense for how both of them were. Like we see with Lynn that, she isn't married and she doesn't have children, and I think that we can see how her upbringing affected that. And I think how she decided, what, I don't want to have kids and be a mom. Like that's not something that I'm interested in. And you can see how her upbringing and how she was raised led to that. And I think similarly with her sister, you can see how her upbringing deals with her children, because when Korra goes and finds Opal, who's the airbender, that she tells Opal's mom, we're planning on taking her with us to the Northern Air Temple, and her mom's like, just no, like she can stay here. And I think you see Opal and her siblings, and we see the different things we do, and it's like she says in the city she created that they encourage people to be the best they can be and find the things that we're good at. And her Lynn's sister, like her children are obviously all very gifted, but as you notice, all of them are still in the city. Like none of them are living other places, and it's like, and obviously again, she flat out refuses to let Opal go to another city. And so it's obvious that, as much as she wants her children to develop their skills and be good at something, it's obvious that she wants to keep them in the nest. Like she doesn't want them to leave. And to be honest, I imagine that that's going to be a pretty interesting plot point as the show goes on, because I imagine, Opal can't stay in that city forever, and obviously neither can Korra. So I imagine that Opal's probably going to do what her mom did, because her mother mentions that when she was young, when she was 16, which I think Opal looks to be about 16, that she left Republic City and went and explored the world. And obviously we know Toph left home and she explored the world. So I imagine Opal probably is going to end up doing the same thing. And I imagine that, her mother mentions that Toph wasn't exactly cool with, her going off and exploring the world. And obviously we know Toph's parents weren't particularly cool about it when Toph did it. So I imagine that based on what we've seen of Opal and her mom, I think Opal's probably going to leave. And I think her mom is similarly not going to be super cool about it, which I guess that's just a Bei Fong thing. So that'll definitely be interesting. And I'm really glad that the show's creators so far have, written something that's pretty interesting. And, hopefully it stays interesting, because, what they gave us with the Bei Fong family is very interesting, and there's a lot of really interesting dynamics there. And so I'm definitely looking more forward to seeing more of that. And I'm just glad that they went there and just didn't decide to make everybody just perfect parents and perfect people. And I'm glad that they kind of set up consequences for how people's parenting decisions affect their kids, because they could have, particularly like with the Aang gang as adults, they could have just written them all as being super awesome people with no issues whatsoever. So I'm definitely glad that they went there. So overall, I really enjoyed both of the episodes. Both of them had really good things to see. I'm definitely interested in seeing, I guess, where the conflict goes in the upcoming episodes, because I'm still not sure who's like a bigger threat still. So hopefully we'll learn more about that. Maybe we'll get to see what the Earth Queen's gonna do, since obviously Korra did take the airbenders, and so it'd be interesting to see, is she really going to declare war? And if she does, I guess more than how Korra's gonna deal with this, like how are the rest of the countries gonna deal with that? Because obviously that's a serious issue. It'll be interesting to see what goes on with Zahir and his gang, and it'll be interesting to figure out more about what his motives are, because obviously we find out in episode 4 that they're not really sure what his motives were, just that he kidnapped Korra in the past, and they don't really know why. So it'll kind of be interesting to see what his motives are. I'm definitely looking forward to next week's episode. I think we're probably just going to get the one episode. And with that, we'll already be halfway through the season. So far the season's been pretty interesting. So with that said, make sure to comment, rate, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys again next time.